Hey, this is the Canadian Taxpayers Federation podcast, where we're dedicated to lower taxes, less waste, and more accountable government. So, Franco, you've been doing what you love to do and digging through data there in Ottawa. And it looks like we aren't going to balance the budget for a heck of a long time at the federal level. What is going on up there?
Yeah, that's right. But hey, we actually kind of have some good news. So first, the good news. The good news is that the feds are going to balance the budget way before 2070. Chris, you probably remember. Yeah, we were digging it up through PBO spreadsheets last year, and we found that the feds wouldn't balance the budget until 2070. Well, we got a new report from the PBO and a little bit of good news. It turns out the feds will balance the budget by 2041. So a few decades earlier, but of course the bad news is glaring us right in the face, and that's that another 2 decades of deficits under the status quo. But brace yourself, Chris, because it gets even worse. For the federal government to balance the budget by 2041, they need low interest rates, they need steady economic growth every single year, and they need to be able to find the spine to say no to new spending.
And we have seen no evidence of that over the past many years. Now, you and I were talking about this last week about the fact that they really need all their ducks in a row. Like they need, super good surfing weather in order to be able to even balance it by 2041. Can you break some of that down? What sort of goalposts are they hoping to reach in order to even get this sucker balanced in a couple decades?
Yeah, 2041 is when they would balance the budget under the status quo, which is ridiculous. But they need 3 other things really to happen, right? 3 things. Number one is they need interest rates to stay relatively low, about 2.5% for the next 20 years for the government. So right now, the government is borrowing at about 1.7%. That's according to the PBO. But 2.5% is lower than rates were every single year between 1991 and 2015. And we just saw the central bank put in a very big interest rate hike, right? So very questionable there. But the second thing that the federal government needs is uninterrupted decades of steady economic growth. They need 8% nominal GDP growth this year. They need 5% next year. Then they need 4% every year after that until 2041. I mean, who knows? Maybe we'll stumble into 2 decades of uninterrupted economic growth, but hey, maybe we won't. And then Chris, here's the craziest part of this whole thing. The federal government cannot announce any new spending that wasn't already included in the last budget.
What? Regardless of party, the idea of a federal government no longer announcing new spending, that's not going to happen. We would like to see that happen. We would like to see them balance their budgets as aggressively as possible and still provide services to people who need it. But I just can't see that happening. How on earth are they going to make that happen?
Well, they should be able to make it happen, right? Because let's look at just how big and bloated that this government is. The way that the government has been spending for years, really finding savings in every area of the budget should be like finding water in the ocean. So it's doable. It is doable. But let's look at the government's track record and let's try to be realistic here. First, we've had the finance minister herself, Chrystia Freeland. She acknowledged that budget 2022 doesn't even contain all of the Liberal Party's promises from the last election. So already we're casting doubt on that very rosy projection. But then let's look even further back. So before the pandemic, you had the Trudeau government in 2018 spending all-time highs, even adjusted for inflation and population growth, which means that before the pandemic, the Trudeau government spent more money in 2018 than the federal government did during any single year during World War II. And this year, Trudeau wants to spend $90 billion more than that. And of course, remember Trudeau promised taxpayers he would balance the budget. Remember when he was running in 2015, he would balance the budget by 2019? Well, he ended up missing that target by about $20 billion even before the pandemic.
He also said that the budget would just balance itself. So sorry for being unconfident or inconfident, whatever the term is, in this fiscal management. But I just wanted you to repeat that point. The year 2018, in that singular year, they spent more money than in any single year of the Second World War, adjusted for inflation and population. That's right?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I know it's crazy, but so this is before the pandemic. 2018, the Trudeau government spent more money than the feds did during any single year during World War II. In 2018, there wasn't a cross-country recession, there wasn't a pandemic, and the federal government was spending all-time highs.
And for folks who aren't old enough to have lived through it, maybe you could crack open a history book. The Second World War was a big, hairy deal. We were spending a ton of money during the Second World War. So the fact that they were spending more money in any year before the pandemic is just mind-boggling. But I'm going to try to play devil's advocate because I know a lot of our listeners right now, it's tough out there. A lot of folks have seen pay cuts. Some of them have lost their businesses. A lot of folks are deep in debt, average Canadian people. So devil's advocate, why does it matter that they're not balancing the budget at the federal government level? A lot of people can't balance their budgets. Why should we care?
Well, here's why it matters. So by the time the feds eventually get around to balancing the books in 2041, interest charges on the government credit card will have cost taxpayers $802 billion. Chris, that's a cost of $18,000 for every single Canadian, right? So that's hundreds of billions of dollars that can't be used to improve government services, that can't be used to fix the potholes, to expand healthcare capacity. And that's also money that can't be used to lower taxes so Canadians can actually afford groceries, can afford to get their kids into hockey. But here's another very important thing to keep in mind, because big deficits, big borrowing costs, that's going to push politicians to look for new taxes. And we've already seen the government raise taxes recently. Payroll taxes up, booze taxes up, the carbon tax up. And let's not forget, we dug up documents that show that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau requested a briefing note on a potential wealth tax. And we also dug up the fact that Trudeau's staff met twice with the group that is receiving tax dollars to push for new home taxes. So this is really important for everyday people, and it really is a pocketbook issue.
Yeah, for sure it is. It seems pretty overwhelming, all of these numbers and all of this money and all of this debt. But I read through your pre-budget report, and there were some solutions in there, like real ones. And so I want to give people a bit of hope that, this is fixable. Just, grab the toolbox. What is the fix here? What could they do? If you had their ear and they were going to listen to you, what would you tell them to do?
I would say, stop spending like crazy. Okay, right? There, done.
I'm just envisioning, when you said no new spending, I just pictured them announcing some brand new conference that we're hosting and then blowing tens of millions of dollars on it. Like they could do that in the blink of an eye. So yes, stop spending like crazy. Go ahead.
Well, you mentioned the pre-budget submission. Of course, we were able to present to the Finance Committee our recommendations, and the budget submission was 75 pages long. So if our listeners want to give that a read, that we'll put it in our show notes for them. But look, it actually is only going to take a very little amount of restraint to get the books back to balance. We would actually balance the budget federally by 2024 just by bringing spending back to the pre-pandemic levels, which were all-time highs, and even allowing it to adjust upwards for inflation and population growth. So relatively easy restraint for the government to balance the books within a few years. So that's the high-level picture. Let me just give you a few examples. So, well, number one, you got to rein in the ballooning bureaucracy. We've seen the number of bureaucrats increase by thousands and thousands every single year. We saw that more than 300,000 federal government employees received at least one pay raise, while their neighbors in the private sector struggled through pay cuts, job losses, business losses. Then there's also corporate welfare, right? We've heard since 2017, the Trudeau government announced about $18 billion worth of corporate welfare. And then, of course, it's just the obvious examples of waste. Scrap the Mission Cultural Fund, where we gave $8,000 for a sex toy show in Germany.
And we fly chefs around the world. Sorry to interrupt, man, but I just couldn't believe that. We actually fly Canadian chefs around the world. Diplomats have red phones in far-flung countries. They're feeling a little hungry. They pick up the phone. We fly them out. Like, it is nuts what they're spending over at Global Affairs.
And talking about expensive trips, what about the Governor General? Remember, the Governor General and her entourage just spent about $80,000 on airplane food. Well, that's a place you can find savings. And speaking of Rideau Hall, why don't we just stop giving former governor generals expense accounts for life? So there are obvious places to find some savings. What's so unfortunate, Chris, is that it doesn't even seem like they're trying at this point.
No, they really aren't. So, folks, we are trying, and Franco's plan to get back to balance is actually a really good, thorough read, and it's not difficult to get through. So, check out our show notes there and see how we can get it back to balance.
Hi, I'm Scott Hennig, president of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. If you've got another minute, I'd like to ask you to think about the one person you know that would really enjoy listening to this podcast. Do us a favor and do them a favor and send them a quick note to let them know about it. At the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we believe there is power in numbers. That's why we've worked so hard to build an army of taxpayers who are ready to push back. And we did it because people like you shared our work with that one person that they knew would really appreciate taking part. Thanks for listening, and thanks for doing your part to make Canada a better place.